Kumlen and Ablat Gemara, today's blotted up Mem Zayin Amar Aleph. We'll begin with Mem Vav and Beis, the beginning of the Sugya. We're going to discuss now whether on Shmini Atzeres and Chutz La'aretz to be sitting in the Sukkah or not, and so on. Says the Gemara, 4 lines on the bottom of Mem Vav and Beis. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Bereid Rav Shmuel Bar Shilat. Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel Bar Shilat, said Mashmei Rav in the name of Rav. Shmini Safik Shvi on Shmini Atzeres in Chutz La'aretz, when it could be Shana Rabbah or the 8th day, is Shvi LeSukkah. We will treat it as far as Sukkah is concerned as if it's a Shana Rabbah. Ushmini LeBracha. And as far as Bracha is concerned, we'll treat it like Shmini Atzeres. And at this stage, we think Bracha means davening and benching. You'll say Yal Yova, you'll say Shmini Atzeres Chag Hazeh, or Chag Shmini Atzeres Hazeh. And then that's his view. But Rabbi Yechon disagrees. He says Shmini is considered Shmini Atzeres Lazeh Vilazeh. It's considered Atzeres not only for the bracha, but also as far as Sukkah is concerned. What exactly does it mean? So we have two opinions of the Gemara how to understand what's going on in the Machlekes. So opinion number one: Meisiv sitting in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres Kuliyam Le Pligi. There's absolutely no discussion. The Yasvina that we sit in the Sukkah. Ki Pligi. When do we argue Livruche? We argue is in a case whether you make a bracha or not. And that's the whole argument. But everyone agrees you sit in the Sukkah. The one who says that it's a 7th day that what we treat like a Shana Rabbah, then Bruchin Amavachil, then you have to make a bracha as well. We're discussing on Shmini Atzeres. Do you sit in the Sukkah or not? So right now we're saying that everyone agrees you sit in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. The argument is whether you make a bracha. So Rabbi Shmuel Bar Shelat, he was of the opinion that you also make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres because maybe it's 7th day. And Rabbi Yechon says, Laman Dama, 2 lines on top, Shmini Lazeh Lazeh. Rabbi Yechon says that it's considered Shmini Atzeres as far as Sukkah is concerned as well. Bruche Lein Levachinan. You sit in the Sukkah and you eat all your meals in Sukkah, but you don't make a bracha. The question is, how come Lulav we don't make a Shmini Atzeres as well? What's the difference between Lulav and Sukkah? So many answers, but one answer is that a Lulav, you never take a Lulav. Why we also don't have a lulav? Because the mitzvah. So then it looks like you're doing it. It looks like you're doing it for sukkahs. Sukkah, sitting in a sukkah doesn't necessarily mean that it's sukkahs. People in the warm weather generally go outside as well, go out in the gazebo and eat inside there. So therefore, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's sukkah. So that's why you're allowed to. Or to use that explanation as well to say maybe it's about Tosef if you're sitting in a sukkah an extra day. But sukkah, since it could be you're just doing it for the sake of a sukkah, you're allowed to sit in the sukkah, you just don't make a bracha. So there's no about Tosef. But a lulav, if you can take the lulav, the very fact of taking the lulav looks like about Tosef really as well. If about Tosef is the criteria, so then according to Vilgon, you shouldn't be sleeping in the sukkah because that's the only reason why you sleep in the sukkah is because of the mitzvah. So you shouldn't be sleeping in the sukkah, but eating, yes, you eat all your meals there. According to the Chaim, that normally sukkah is supposed to be machmeh, try to even drink even shahakol to make it in the sukkah, but maybe Shmuel says you shouldn't because then it looks like you're doing bal tosef. Others say it makes no difference because you're not making since even in sukkahs itself you don't have to make a bracha if you're drinking liquid, so there's no bal tosef at all there. Others say that lulav is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, so therefore we're lenient. Sukkah mitzvah d'Oraisa. Others explain that sukkah is questionable by the Shmini Atzeres Rabbah, so we're suffering the Torah Yimachmed. That's why we sit in sukkah. But a bracha is only midrabanan, so you don't make a bracha. Says in the further, Rabbi Yechon says in the Koi Rabbi Yehuda follow Rabbi Yechon that you don't make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres because Rabbi Huna bar Bizna, Rabbi Huna the son of Bizna, and all the leaders that generation equal b'sukkah. They came to a sukkah b'shmini safek shvi hashmini atzeres in chutz la'aretz meisiv havayasa. They all sat in the sukkah. Aber brucha lebrucha. They did not make a bracha sitting in the sukkah. What we do today. Says the Gemara b'dilmos vidlu. Maybe the whole like the opinion we learned yesterday. Kemand Omar kiven shebeidich yom tov rishon shuv einam mevarich. That sukkahs you make a bracha only one day, and then it's because one long mitzvah. Like we had the name Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Bachal named Rabbi Yechanan. So therefore you only make a bracha once, and it lasts for the entire sukkah. So maybe that's why they didn't make a bracha then. Maybe, but everybody else, according to we hold, every time you walk in the sukkah you make a bracha. Maybe you should make a bracha Shmini Atzeres. So Gemara answers, and this is the most astonishing Gemara. Gemiri, we know that what happened here was that ma'afar ka'aseh. We know that they came from a very far away place. No, they came from out in the pastures. They were out there with their flock. They didn't have a sukkah the entire sukkahs, so they couldn't have been yaitza with the bracha of the first day. Imagine, so Tosfos here, the second Tosfos at the top of the page says, what do you call it? He says clearly, look at Tosfos, Gemiri Mafakasa, Boyim min if they came from out there in the pastures, Shebehemesein Royisham, their animals there were wandering about. V'lo Yoshvu Besukah Kol Yimei Chag. They did not have a sukkah. They were out in the out there somewhere in the farms. They didn't have a sukkah. Afagav damim. We learned before sukkah zeroyim that there's a concept called even a sukkah that shepherds had. They didn't bother having one. What is going on here? Most astonishing Gemara.
And it's called Gdolei Hadoyel.
Everybody's perplexed. I once saw in a sefer a beautiful shot. I can't remember who said it, but it's a beautiful shot. He said that we're talking about that you make a bracha the first day and the last. They hold that you make a bracha the first day and the last for the full 7 days. But in the Gemara Pesachim we learned that in Chutz La'aretz, even though we know what the kviyas of the Archa, we still have to. The minhag is that we follow 2 days. But we learned the Gemara there in Absafra. If you're in the midbar, you're not in the yishuv, and you happen to know kviyas of the Archa, then you don't have to keep 2 days. Only when you come into a city in Chutz La'aretz. So these people here, they knew Kriyas V'Yachad. They kept the first day sukkahs. They made the bracha. So the bracha of the first day lasts for the whole sukkahs. But where they were out in the desert, out in the wilderness there, or the farms, or in the mountains tops with their animals. And so they weren't in the yishuv. They weren't in the city. So they knew exactly when sukkahs was. So therefore, they were going to celebrate sukkah 7 days. So the bracha they made on the first day was going to last for 7 days. But then when they came into the yishuv, when they came back into town and they're keeping an 8th day, so therefore the bracha that they made the first day would not have carried over to the 8th day for them, because when they made the bracha, they were in a place where they knew the kriyas of the Archa, and they were out in the middle with their animals, afar, and therefore they knew they only had to have 7 days. That's why they should have made a bracha when they came back into the sukkah, and the fact that they didn't make a bracha proves that you don't make a bracha on Shmini Atzeres. That's pshat. So yeah, that's version. That's one version. Another version. Baruch called Amala Pligate Levar. Everyone you don't make a bracha Shmini Atzeres. Keep pligi lemezev. B'chal do you sit in the sukkah and Shmini Atzeres? V'man dama shivu l'sukkah. The one that says that as far as sukkahs are concerned, we treat it as sukkah. As far as Shmini Atzeres is concerned, I'm talking about sukkahs. Where you say maybe it's sukkahs, then meisav yasvinim. We sit in the sukkah. V'man dama shmini l'zeh. Rabbi Yechon says that no, it's treated completely like Shmini Atzeres. Meisav namadus when you don't even sit. Rabbi Yosef the Kaiti Rabbi Yechon biyodach. Follow Rabbi Yechanan, the Mora de Shmaita. Who is the author of this whole opinion? Who started this whole sugya? Rabbi Yehuda bar Shmuel, Man Yehuda bar Shmuel bar Shilot, and yet we know B'Shmini Safek Shvi Lebar Mesukah Yosef. He sat outside the sukkah. The Hilchah said if the halach is so therefore even there's an opinion that says they don't sit in the sukkah, and yet he himself did. Even though he's the one who said that Shmini Atzeres is treated like sukkahs, he himself did not sit in the sukkah, which is odd against his own view. Says the halach is meisev yasvinin beruchilim mevachin. The halach is you sit in the sukkah Shmini Atzeres and you don't make a bracha. And it's clear that's halacha, and that's what everybody follows. Another reason, the Rif says, another reason why we don't make a bracha is on Shmini Atzeres. We sit in the sukkah is because it's tarta de sasri. It seems to contradict each other. You're saying you're making kiddush Shmini Atzeres, Chag, and then you say Leishiva sukkah. So therefore, we don't do that. So everybody, so in Shulchan Aruch, there is no divergent opinion. Everyone, this is clear Shulchan Aruch. There's no other opinion. The Magen Avraham then is amazed that there are some people who don't sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, so they make kiddush in the sukkah, eat a piece of mazaynus, and then go into the house. He says he doesn't know where that comes from, and so on and so forth. So today they try to justify where that opinion comes from. So the Aruch HaShulchan wants, I think Aruch HaShulchan wants to say that, remember I gave you like 4 or 5 different reasons to explain why we don't make a bracha, why it's different than lulav. So the one that says because we don't want it to look like Baal Tosef, so people go out, it's pleasant, and therefore we go in the sukkah. It's not Baal Tosef because it's a normal thing to do, even though it's not Yom Tov. But since we live in colder climates, and he says, and therefore it's not normal to go out to a sukkah to eat. And if you do, it's clear you're doing it for the mitzvah, and it's a problem about Baal Tosef. That's what he wants to say, but even he says he shouldn't do that. But again, the different minhagim, the Bayit hated that Gos Maimonides brings a minhag of not sitting in the sukkah and eating, because since you're asking for rain, how can you sit in the sukkah and ask for rain at the same time? That you won't be asking for rain for the whole heart, so you just make kiddush and everything else. But So whatever the minig is, but clearly this is the halach. You should sit in the sukkah all your meals, and Spirit said is no different than any other time of sukkah. In fact, the Rebbe once made a comment to who's a real chassid that on Shmini Atzeres and it's raining for a cup of water, he will go in the sukkah and drink it. Says he further. Rabbi Yechon said, Zman b'Shmini Shulchag. Shmini Atzeres, even though it's connected, it flows right down from sukkahs. It's treated like a separate Yom Tov as far as Shechion is concerned, or we make a Shechion. They know means man b'Shvi Pesach, but on Shvi Pesach we don't make Shechion. Because it's a continuation of Pesach. Asking I prove it to you, the Gimel body Shmini Atzeres is separate from the rest of Sukkahs in three ways. Manifests some 3 ways. Fiddle Sukkah, you no longer sit in the Sukkah if you're not yourself, for example. Lulav, you no longer make a bracha on Lulav, and Nisach Hamayim. Nisach Hamayim comes to an end on Hoshana Rabbah. And according to Yehuda, said Nisach Hamayim continues into Shmini Atzeres. The number says the leg even Nasach. First of all, you say 3 leg and I say 1 leg. Number 2, Kol Shmeina, I hold it goes in Shmini Atzeres. Even according to Yehuda, there's 2 things that separate Shmini Atzeres and the rest of Yom Tov, and therefore you make a Shechion, like a new Yom Tov. So Shvius Pesach also is different than the rest of the Pesach. The first night you have to eat matzah, but in Shvius Pesach it's reshus. Yes, no. Only the first night you have to. For the rest of Pesach, it's optional. No, so Shvius Pesach is different than the rest of Pesach. What are you comparing? Even if you wanted to contrast it to the first day, the first night you have to eat matzah, but the first day technically you don't have to eat matzah, and therefore Shvi Pesach is not different than the first day of Pesach. It's only different than the first night. Mashenke Shmini Atzeres is different than any part of Sukkot. By Sukkot, even the first day you have to sit in the sukkah, and here you go. Ravina said Choluk. Now this is interesting because the big machlekes is showing him if the Gzeres Shabbat Tezvav is telling you have to eat in the sukkah, but by day, al sukkahs you don't have to eat in the sukkah. You only have to eat al yom tov, not al sukkahs. And if you learn that you don't have to eat al yom tov, but only as sukkahs, then the shear is different how much you have to eat than at night. So Pesach is the same thing then. Pesach by day you don't have to eat matzah, but you have to wash because it's yom tov, and obviously then you can eat matzah. So how is sukkahs different than Pesach? Doesn't that prove that even by day there's a mitzvah to eat in the sukkah, not just because it's yom tov, but because it's sukkahs? It's a chilo sukkah, which makes it a little bit difficult. Well, they're going to say that we're not going to follow this particular Amora, they're going to follow other Amora. We'll see. Ravina says, another difference is, and maybe that's exactly what Ravina is arguing about. It said Ravina Omar. Ravina Omar means he's arguing. What's he arguing? He's just giving a new explanation. He says, Shvi Pesach is different than, let's say, the first day of Pesach, but not different than Chalamoid. Mashaying and Sukkot is different even than Chalamoid. What's he arguing? He's giving another answer. So maybe he is arguing. Maybe he holds that the very first day of Sukkah of Pesach you have to eat matzah by day, just like you have to eat by night. And or he holds that the very first day of Sukkot, maybe he holds that the very first day of Sukkot you don't have to eat in the Sukkah because of the Sukkah you have to eat in Sukkah because of Yom Tov, which is then no different than the first day of Pesach, and therefore he has to come up with another reason why it's different. So maybe that's the argument between Ravina and the first answer that we just and the Chomachanin. Says the Gemara, Papa gives another answer. Par. When it comes to all the bulls, when it comes to Sukkah, this is a whole number 13, 12, 11, 10. When it comes to Shmini Atzeres, it's only a single par. Another difference. Here it says Biyayim, and over there it says Uvayim. By Pesach, every time it says Uvayim, but over here by Shmini Atzeres it says Biyayim. It's like a whole new Yom Tov. Here it says Kim Mishpat. All the other days of Sukkot it says Kim Mishpatam, which is in plural because they're all connected. Because it says Kim Mishpat, which is only one. Let us say Taka. We can prove it. So this thing that Rabbi Yechon said, you don't say Shechianu Shvius Pesach, but you do say Shechianu on Shmini Atzeres. We have something to support that you do say Shechianu on Shmini Atzeres. Where? I'll bring it right to Rabbi Yechon. Hapodim, it says Hapodim Ha'eli v'Hakvosim on Sukkot, the number of Podim, the number of rams, and the number of sheep. Ma'akmin says that if you don't have the full amount, don't bring any of it. You have to have the full amounts to be able to bring it. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you have to bring 13. Let's say the first day bulls, you only have 12. Don't bring 12. You don't bring anything. And Rabbi Yehuda says, Parim aim akvizezem. When it comes to the parim, when it comes to other ones, I agree. But when it comes to parim, it doesn't matter. Why? All the other ones, the numbers are static. All the other ones is 2. You bring two rams, 14 sheep every single day. It's the same amount. It's uniform. Every single day, same amount. So therefore, it's pivotal. When it comes to the bulls, every day is different. You start off with 13, then goes 12, 11. So that proves the number is fluid. So if the first day number 1 instead of 13, you only have 11. Bring 11. They get less than this. So they told him, so how come you're not worried about it? How come when it comes to sheep and the rams, you are worried? That number changes also on Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres, you only bring 1 ram and seven lambs, 7 sheep, rather than 2 and 14. So if you're saying because numbers change as a raya, that we're not so pedantic, you're not so particular about the number, so too you shouldn't be particular when it comes to the rams or it comes to the sheep. And then you are very particular. He said, what do you bring me a raya for Shmini Atzeres? Shmini regel b'fnei atzvehu. So Yehuda comes along and says that Shmini Atzeres is a totally separate yomtiv. And in what respect? Just like Sukkot requires a carbon, it requires its own carbon, and it has its own song, its own shira. The Levim, when they sing, they have the different shir. Ubracha, it has its own bracha. We'll see later what that means. And we'll see whether it means shechiyanu. And that's how we're going to try to say that. It means it has its own shechiyanu. And that supports Rabbi Yechon, that Shmini Atzeres is a totally separate Yom Tov and Heshchion. The Lina, and also whenever you bring a carbon, you have to spend the night in Yerushalayim, and you have to spend the night again in Yerushalayim for Shmini Atzeres. Is Av Shmini, that's what you do on Sukkot. Av Shmini, so the Shmini Atzeres, Tom carbon has its own carbon, the shear, its own shear, its own capital film, the bracha, its own bracha, the Lina, its own Lina. My lav, what does bracha mean? Isn't bracha's man. So we see clearly that Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmini Atzeres is a separate yom tov altogether, and means that you make shechiyanu. And the Chacham don't argue in the principle of making shechiyanu. They just say that we don't agree with your whole concept because numbers change. It should mean that we're not particular. We definitely are. Dafka 113 the first day, 12 the second day, 11 the third day, because it represents the influence of the goyim on Klal Yisrael. Says about Eloi, if that's your evidence, it's not compelling. You know why? I can argue bracha means birchas hamaz in the tefillah, the yalav yaveh that you say in benching, and the yalav yaveh that you say in davening by Shabbos. Rest of Sukkot you say Shem Chag Sukkot, and here you say Shmini Atzeres Chag or Chag Shmini Atzeres and so on. Rashi's version is Es Yen Shmini Chag Atzeres. We'll come back to what the differences are. Says Yimar Hachanam Established. In fact, it makes even more sense that it means. Yal Yav, it doesn't mean Shechiyanu. Because Isa Gedat, I'll prove it to you. That Isa doesn't mean Shechiyanu. Man Kol Shiva Mi'ika, he's saying the difference between the entire Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres is bracha. If you tell me it means Yal Yav, I understand. Every day is Sukkot, you say Yal Yav, davening and benching. It's different than when you say Shmini Atzeres. But if it's Shechiyanu, it's a one-off. You say the first night and that's it. How can it be different than the entire 7 days of Sukkot? That's not a reason why to reject what we just said, because Shechiyanu is suitable the entire Sukkot. Because the like body if you forgot to say it the first day, you say the second day, you can say it any time of Sukkot, and therefore it could still be talking about Shechiyanu. Any other day, my time. What do we say any other day? When we make Shechiyanu, you have to make it on Kiddush. We had yesterday that they used to put a pile all the brachas on a cup of wine. You have to have a cup of wine. And what happens? You don't have a cup of wine, then you cannot make shechiyanu the entire sukkah, and yet we hear is contrasting. So the is not shechiyanu. And lamer, let's say otherwise, let us use this din. If you tell me it's talking about shechiyanu and it's suitable for the entire sukkah, and most people couldn't really afford wine the entire sukkah, so let's prove what we learned in Gemara Eruvin of Memde that lamer misayele of Nachman. Let's support them Nachman. The Nachman zman oimer v'bashuk. You're walking down the street and suddenly you remember Chalamoid. You forgot to make shechiyanu. Make it right there and then on the spot. You don't need a cup of wine. Why don't we use this to support him? Obviously, it's no support because it's not talking about shechiyanu. Who has a cup every day? Not everyone could afford to have a cup every single day. In Shulchan we say you should drink a cup of wine every single day of Sukkot, because the mitzvah of Samachta ain't simcha basa the yayin, and especially today basa is questionable, so definitely yayin. But what about people who don't have wine, can't afford it? As Rashi says, not everyone has wine available in Chol Hamoed. Says the Gemara, no. That's not a problem. I can still argue too much Shechiyanu, and I can still say there's no support to Rav Nachman here either because you need to have a cup of wine. He's not everyone has it. You're right. So what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is different than Sukkot. If you happen to have a cup of wine, you can make a Shechiyanu any day of Sukkot. But Shemir says you got to make a new Shechiyanu. Dilma, the equal like you have a cup. So what we have here right now is we don't have a proof either way. You can argue that bracha means shechiyanu, and therefore if you hold you make it like Rabbi Yechon. But you can also argue equally that it means Yahweh Yahweh, and it means so therefore. And here's the Shmini Atzeret Chagida, so it's very different. Says the Gemara. Let me ask a question. So Rabbi Yehuda Shmini told Lina, you're telling me Rabbi Yehuda holds that the eighth day Shmini Atzeret requires Lina. Now we're just focusing on the Bryce itself. Rabbi Yehuda said the Bryce that Shmini says, what do you call it? Shmini Atzeres requires. He said Shmini Atzeres is different than the rest of Sukkot. Don't ask me questions why the number of kabbalas changed because it's different in many respects. And one of the respects he said bracha and it says lina, resting overnight. Rabbi Yehuda requires resting overnight by Shmini Atzeres. But Tanya we learned elsewhere. Rabbi Yehuda, we're asking a question on Rabbi Yehuda himself from himself. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Menayin lePesach Sheni she'enton lina, hayin lePesach Sheni." When you bring it, if you have to bring up your makeup carbon, you don't have to spend the night in Yerushalayim. So it says, "Ufanisa b'abayka." Regarding the first Pesach, it says that in the morning you should head back. Well, after go back home. See, in the next pasuk it says that afterwards, Sheish Yom Tov matzahs, and then Pesach you should eat matzah 6 days. So what's the juxtaposition of these two psukim? Esheton Shisha, the first Pesach, which requires 6 more days of celebrating Ton Lina. If you go bring a carbon, you got to spend the night in Yerushalayim. Esheton Shisha, a Yom Tov doesn't have 6 days. You don't have to rest overnight. Well, Shmini Atzeres is a separate Yom Tov. You're telling me there's only 1 day. If it's 1 day, you don't have to spend the night there. So therefore, how can you say that Shmini Atzeres requires lina? What you're trying to exclude? Even Shmini Atzeres, it's only 1 day Yom Tov. As I know, Lemute is coming to exclude Pesach Sheni. It's coming to exclude Pesach Sheni de Kavosei. In fact, all we're talking there about is the contrast between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. That Pesach Rishon requires you to spend the night in Yerushalayim because of 6 more days, but Pesach Sheni doesn't. It was only on 1 day. He's not even talking about Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres, maybe you still have to spend the night there, and that's what he's saying here. And Hachanam is in fact, it makes sense. And we learned, I'll prove to you that even sometimes when you do a 1 night thing, a 1 day thing, you still have to spend the night there. But now we come, for example, Pekurim. Hapukurim to unin carbon. That when you bring a Bekurim, you have to bring together with the Bekurim a carbon shlamim. Why? Because it says in the 6th parasha, Samachta b'chol hatay. We're talking about over there when you bring the Bekurim and all everything was going on at the beginning of this week's parasha. It says Samachta b'chol hatay. She rejoiced with all the good. And what's all the good? And we have a rule in Psachim, Ein Simcha El Shlamim, has to be dafka an animal. So therefore, it's a carbon shlamim. So b'kurim, whenever you bring kurim, you have to bring along with it a carbon. You have to bring a shir because it says cholatayv, and what's nicer and more enjoyable than singing a song? And this is what Levim used to say. And tenufa. And also they used to wave it. Well, soon tomorrow we're supposed to say how you're supposed to wave it. The bikurim, velina man shamet velina, and you're also required to spend the night there. Now, lina it's a 1 night thing, and it's only 1 day, and yet you spend the night there. Now, who's the author? What's a kasha? Who said this? Rabbi Yehuda? Maybe it's somebody else. Velina man shamet. One of the requirements is that you have to waive it, the bikurim. Who insists that the bikurim itself have to be waived? Is it Rabbi Yehuda, as we'll soon see, yet he says you need lina. So we see clearly Rabbi Yehuda holds you need lina even if it's 1 day. When he said you don't, he was talking about Pesach Sheni. He wasn't talking about any Yom Tov that only has 1 day. The Tanya, how do you know Rabbi Yehuda is the author of the opinion that says that you have to waive the bikurim? Rabbi Yehuda says, it says the pasuk, it says regarding the bikurim, it says, I brought the bikurim that I gave to the Eibishter v'hinachtoi lifnei Hashem, and I placed it before Hashem, and so on. V'hinachtoi, what do you mean? You should place it. Placing doesn't mean just putting it down. It means trufa. You have to actually wave it. You have to wave it. It says in the pasuk the kohen should take the basket from your hand. In this week's pasuk, look at kohen atene miyodecha, and then it says v'hinicha lifnei Hashem. We'll place it before Hashem. And then it says, V'hinachtoi. Why do you have to say you put it down when you already said you place it before Hashem? In other words, it sounds like the kohen put it down, you picked it up and put it down again. What'd you pick it up for? Must be the reason why you picked it up a second time is after the kohen put it down by his berich is to wave it. Is the truth was waving the angel mamish putting it down. But it says where the kohen should place it down. We already know you put it down. So why you didn't have to? You're picking it up. Obviously, you picked it up again and put it down. Why'd you pick it up again? Must be he's a trufa. You have to wave it. You have to wave it. Says you want to. Okay, so we have a Bryce that says you have to wave it. Is Rabbi Yehuda, but he's not the only one who says you have to wave bikurim. So how do you know the Bryce that says that you require lina by bikurim is the author is Rabbi Yehuda, even though it's a one-day thing, and if you want to say that Shemit says also you need lina. And how do you know that it's Rabbi Yehuda? Because it says tenufa. Rabbi Yehuda is not the only one who holds opines that you need tenufa by bikurim. So does Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. We know that what that the kohen needs tenufa. So the point I'm trying to say is that Rabbi Yehuda maybe hold that you don't need that lina taka you only need 6 days, and bikurim over here it says lina you need lina. It's not Rabbi Yehuda, it's Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. My time Rabbi ben Yaakov, what's his basis? He doesn't learn the same way Rabbi Yehuda learned. So what does he learn from? Says the Gemara, Asi learn out yad agzeda shava yad mishlamim. He learns that yad here it says v'lokach kohen atena miyodecha. The kohen should take it from your hand. Uksiv hasa said by kohen mishlamim yodav tiviena. There it talks about waving the kohen mishlamim. It says yodav tiviena isha Hashem, that your hand should bring the isha Hashem in order to wave it. So ma kan kohen, just like over here by bekurim. When it says lokach kohen. It's talking about the coin. The coin is doing it. Aflahalan coin. So by Shlomoso, it says Yabi is a coin. Umalahalan Baila. It's talking about by the Shlomim when the pasuk says he should take it. It's talking about the owner. Afkambar the owner. So how can it be the owner and the coin? Okay, so how can they both do? How can they both wave? Coin meniach yoder tachas yabailin umenu. They both wave it together. The coin places a hand underneath the person's hand. The bailin put the hand on the basket. The coin puts his hand underneath. Then that. And then they wave together. So we have no proof either way. So bottom line is we don't really have a support for Rabbi Yechanan from Rabbi Yehuda that shechiyanu you make on Shmini Atzeres. When he said bracha, maybe it means something else. So my havilah, bottom line, do you make shechiyanu Shmini Atzeres or you don't? We have an argument. Rav Nachman says, "Oimrim zman b'shmini shel chag." You do say shechiyanu Shmini Atzeres. Ein oimrim zman b'shmini chag. You don't say shechiyanu Shmini Atzeres. The hilchos of the halach is oimrim zman b'shmini shel chag. Halach is you do say shechiyanu by Shmini Atzeres. Tanya Kavose de Rav Nachman. We actually learned the Brayso of Rav Nachman. We had this a few times already in the Gemara, and we learned as follows: Shmini is a regel b'fnei atzma. That Shmini Atzeres is considered a separate Yom Tov altogether. And in what way? L'inyan Pesach Kesher, regarding 6 things. What's the abbreviation of Pesach Kesher? Shmini Atzeres is separate from Sukkot and manifests on the following 6 things. One is Payis B'fnei Atzma. They had to bring the 13 Kabbalah. You add them all up to 70. There were 24 families of Kohanim in the roster. So if you multiply it by 3, it's 72. So they made a lottery, whoever had first, and then they just worked from there, down all through the different kabbalas. But then the last 2 families didn't have a third repeat. So then the question is, when it came to Shmini Atzeres, there's one par. They would make a geidel who had the rights and the schus to do that one par. And the argument is, will only these two families, or the entire lot of 24, they go in the geidel again. So we say payis b'fnei atzma. You draw a new lottery, which shows it's a totally separate yom tov. It's not a continuation of Sukkot. That's number 1. Zman b'fnei atzma. It has its own shechiyanu. Clear. That's a zayin. The reish is regel b'fnei atzma. It's a separate yom tov. According to Rashi, it means because you don't sit in the Sukkot. According to Teisus, it's talking about an oval when you add up the shloishim. And you have the first part of Sukkot equals a number of days, and then you have the Shmini Atzeres another 7 days. Kuf is carbon b'fnei atzma, has a separate carbon altogether. You don't do the 13, 12, 11, only bring a par echad. And Shin is Shida b'fnei atzma, separate song altogether, and different in the middle. And Beis is bracha la'atzma, a separate bracha altogether, which according to some of the Shani means what we had before. It means you say, Shemini Atzeres Chagazeh. According to Rashi, bracha la'atzma means make a bracha on the king, is to make a separate bracha. Now, there's an interesting chakira. This will explain if you look in the nusach and davening. For example, in nusach Lubavitch we say Shmini Atzeres Hechagazeh, right? Shmini Atzeres others chag, and as Rashi says before, you say Siyon Shmini Chag Atzeres Azeh. Others say Chag Shmini Atzeres Azeh, and it's machlekes the Taz, the Ramah. What's going on here? We're going on as simple as follows. The Gemara says that Shmini Atzeres is separate from Sukkot and it manifests itself in 6 ways. There's 2 ways of understanding the Gemara. So is the Gemara saying that Shmini Atzeres is totally separate Yom Tov, and the proof is there are 6 different ways different than Sukkot? Or is it saying that Shmini Atzeres really is part of Sukkot, but in 6 ways is different? These are 6 exceptions. If you learn that Shmini Atzeres is part of Sukkot, then what you're supposed to say it is Shmini Atzeres Hechagazeh. Hechag is referring to Sukkot. That Shmini Atzeres is part of this Yom Tov. If you learn that Shmini Atzeres is totally independent, then it's Yom, then it's Chag Shmini Atzeres is there. Depends where you put the word Chag. If you put the word Chag before Shmini Atzeres, that means Shmini Atzeres is the Chag. If you put the word Chag after Shmini Atzeres, you're saying Shmini Atzeres is part of the overall Chag of Sukkot, and that's explains the 2 different choice in davening. Moshe, have a safe trip.